April 28th, 1988. Started like any other bright, ordinary day in Hawaii. Just a routine short flight between islands.
Yeah, beautiful weather. But then, climbing through 24,000 feet, the unimaginable.
The roof ripped off an airliner. Welcome to the deep dive.
This wasn't just some freak accident, though. It was a moment that really exposed some serious cracks in the system.
Pun intended.
Maybe. But it genuinely changed flying forever. So today we're digging into Aloha Airlines Flight 243 using the sources you sent us.
Right. Our goal isn't just to recount those terrifying 13 minutes, though we will, but to understand why it happened, what led up to it.
And crucially, how did this incredibly close call lead to real, lasting improvements in aircraft safety, especially for older planes? Let's unpack it.
Okay, so Aloha Airlines, they had a pretty specific kind of operation, didn't they?
They really did. All short island hops in Hawaii, constant takeoffs, constant landing.
Which means their planes, mostly these Boeing 737-200s, were racking up huge numbers of, what do they call it, flight cycles.
Exactly, flight cycles. And that's the absolute core issue here.
Because it's not just about how many years a plane's been in service.
Not at all. It's about pressurization cycles. Every time you go up, pressurize the cabin, come down, depressurize. That puts stress on the metal skin, the structure.
Like bending a paperclip back and forth.
Sort of, yeah. Repetitive stress. And the plane involved here, N7311, nicknamed Queen Liliuokalani. She was 19 years old, which sounds old, but...
But the cycles were the real story.
The critical number, almost 89,700 cycles, 89,680 to be exact.
Wow. How did that compare?
It made her the second highest cycle 737 in the world at that time. Her sister ship actually had over 90,000. These planes were way beyond their initial design expectations in terms of cycle.
Okay, so April 28th, Flight 243, Hilo to Honolulu. Quick hop.
Yep. Captain Bob Schornsheimer, First Officer Meanie Tompkins in the cockpit.
Yeah.
Both experienced pilots, 95 people on board altogether.
And there's that detail from the sources.
Yeah.
Really unsettling. About a passenger spotting a crack near the door.
Yeah, seeing a crack while boarding near the front entry door, but didn't say anything.
Just assume the airline must know about it, right?
Apparently, which is just chilling in hindsight.
So the flight takes off, climbing normally towards 24,000 feet, cabin crew starting service.
Pretty much. Michelle Honda in economy, Jane Seta Tamita near the front, row 2, and lead attendant Clarabelle CB Lansing near row 5. Everything seems normal. And then, bam.
At 24,000 feet.
Oh, huge explosion. Violent decompression. The sources say a massive section of the fuselage, basically from row 1 back to row 6.
That's a huge piece.
It is. About 35 square meters of the roof and the upper walls just vanished. Instantly ripped away.
Debris everywhere, air rushing out.
Violent rush of air. The floor near the front actually buckled upwards. The cockpit door just blew off its hinges, passengers thrown about. Many thought the plane was breaking apart.
But somehow, it wasn't. It was still flying.
Miraculously, yes. But the cabin? Imagine it. Yeah. Rows 1 to 6, just open to the sky.
Exposed. Hurricane winds, freezing temperatures, thin air, held in by seatbelts.
Only by their seatbelts. It must have been absolute terror.
And the flight attendants.
Their experience was just horrific. CB Lansing, at row 5, near where the rupture started. She was gone. Ejected instantly. Presumed lost at sea.
Oh my God.
Jane Sato Tamita, near row 2, got hit hard by debris, knocked out cold, trapped under wreckage.
And Michelle Honda?
She was further back, near the tail. She managed to hang on. And then, incredibly, tried to crawl forward to help the others, fighting that wind.
People grabbing for oxygen masks?
Yeah, but they were useless. The whole oxygen system up front was destroyed by the rupture.
Meanwhile, in the cockpit, what did they experience?
Huge bang, deafening roar. The floor beneath them actually bent downwards. The whole cockpit sort of dropped relative to the cabin, snapping support beams.
Did they see what happened?
Captain Schornsheimer looked back and just saw blue sky where the first-class ceiling should have been. He knew instantly it was catastrophic. Emergency descent, straight away, get down to thicker air.
But the noise!
Unbelievable. So loud they couldn't hear each other speak. Had to use hand signals initially.
And the descent itself was risky, right? Diving like that could stress the damaged plane even more.
Exactly. It's standard procedure, but in this case, they were terrified the dive itself might break the plane apart, but they had no choice. They had to get down. Fast.
For the passengers, that dive must have felt like, well, like they were going straight down.
Utter terror. Screaming. And Michelle Honda, still trying to reach James Tomita, fighting the wind, the debris.
Did they even know if the pilots were still there, if the cockpit was attached?
From the cabin, how could they tell? The damage was so bad, the floor sagging. The sources mention Honda asking a passenger in panic, "Do you know how to fly a plane?"
Just awful. And communication. Were they talking to ATC?
First Officer Tompkins was trying desperately, calling Honolulu over and over, no reply.
What radar?
Radar saw them. Squawking 7700, the emergency code, descending fast, veering off course towards Maui.
So someone knew they were in trouble.
Yes. And finally, about 3 minutes after the explosion, Tompkins managed to contact Maui Tower.
But it was hard to communicate.
Extremely hard. The noise was still intense. She finally got through something like, "We're inbound for landing. We are unpressurized, declaring an emergency." The controller apparently first heard 244 through the static.
Okay, so they're descending. Below 10,000 feet, things got a bit better.
A little. Captain slowed the plane down. The wind noise decreased somewhat. They could actually talk again. They were navigating around Maui near the Halatkala volcano.
Passengers could see land? Maybe see they were under control?
Yeah, sources say a bit of hope returned then. Just seeing they were flying, not just falling. Tompkins told the tower, "It looks like we've lost a door. We have a hole in this left side." She couldn't even see the full extent of it. The roof, the right side.
So those final minutes approaching Maui, just holding on.
Pure willpower. Passengers, crew, clinging on, fighting the wind, loose debris flying around, terrified the floor beams would just give way. People praying, just willing the plane to stay together.
And the pilots are fighting the plane itself.
Absolutely. Captain Schwarzenheimer said the controls felt mushy and springy, like the hydraulics were damaged or struggling. Felt like manual reversion, basically flying without power steering.
Making it incredibly hard to maneuver.
Very difficult. And he couldn't deploy the flaps properly. Needed them for a slower landing speed. He could only get 5 degrees instead of the usual 15.
So a faster, trickier landing, and then the landing gear issue.
Right. They lowered the gear, but the light indicating the nose gear was down and locked.
Yeah.
It didn't come on.
Oh, no. So they didn't know if they had nose wheels?
They didn't know for sure, but they were running out of options. They decided to land anyway, risking a collapse or skidding off the runway.
Just one thing after another.
And it wasn't over. On final approach,
Yeah.
the left engine failed.
You're kidding.
Nope. Captain noticed it. Flame out. But at that point,
Mhm.
they were committed. He decided they'd land on one engine if they had to.
What did it look like from the ground?
Surreal. Airport staff saw this thing coming in. One described it looking like a seal after a shark attack. Another said it defied comprehension that it was still flying.
The tower see the gear?
The controller said it looked like the gear was down. Some reassurance, at least.
And then the landing.
1:58 p.m., just 13 minutes and 42 seconds after the explosion. Touchdown at Kahului Airport.
Did it hold together?
It did. The fuselage visibly bent on impact, but the gear held. They used brakes, the one working thrust reverser, and brought it to a safe stop.
Incredible.
The sight, though, rescuers, looking up through that massive hole at bleeding, terrified passengers. It remains the most severely damaged airliner ever to make a successful emergency landing.
The relief must have been indescribable. Mixed with chaos, I imagine.
Total chaos. Relief, yes, but also the horror of the injuries. 65 people injured, 8 seriously. Jane Sato Tomita, the flight attendant, had a bad concussion, head wounds. An elderly woman fractured her skull. Others had puncture wounds, terrible wind burn.
And the emergency response was delayed.
Yeah, tragically. The controller, understandably stressed, forgot to call for ambulances until after they landed. And Maui didn't have enough ambulances anyway. They ended up using private tour vans to get people to the hospital.
And the confirmation about CB Lansing?
Confirmed missing. Witnesses saw her ejected right at the moment it happened.
Oh.
A 37-year veteran flight attendant.
Just terrible. Did they ever find her or the wreckage?
No. Extensive searches found nothing. Neither her nor that huge missing section of the fuselage were ever recovered from the ocean.
So the investigation starts, NTSB arrives. Must have been tough without that main piece of fuselage.
You'd think so. But what they found on the rest of the plane was, well, it told the story pretty quickly. The sources are blunt. The remaining fuselage was in a sorry state.
How bad?
Riddled with problems. Corrosion, fatigue, cracks everywhere, loads of patches over previous repairs. One investigator basically said it was a wonder it held together at all. They found cracks starting from nearly every single rivet hole along some of the joints.
Every rivet hole. How does a plane get like that? What was the actual failure mechanism?
Okay, so you have to look at how these early 737s were built. They used thin aluminum skin panels joined by overlapping them slightly, called lap joints.
Right.
And initially, these joints were held together by 2 things. 3 rows of rivets, and a special cold bond epoxy adhesive between the overlapping layers. The epoxy was meant to spread the load, take stress off the rivets, but that cold bonding process wasn't always perfect. Over time, especially with moisture getting in, the bond could fail. It could disbond.
So the glue stops working.
Essentially. And when that happens, all the stress from those thousands of pressurization cycles gets concentrated right onto those rows of rivets.
And you said there were cracks at the rivet hole.
Exactly. Because these planes use flush rivets, the heads sit flat with the skin for aerodynamics. The edge of the underlying skin panel pressed right up against the rivet hole. It created a tiny, sharp knife edge.
Like scoring glass before breaking it.
A perfect analogy. That knife edge was the perfect place for tiny fatigue cracks to start under the repeated stress. And once started, they'd slowly grow along the line of rivets, joining up.
Okay, so that's the structural vulnerability, but why was it so bad on this plane?
2 big factors for Aloha. 1, the environment. Hawaii is warm, humid, salty air near the ocean. That accelerates corrosion, which weakens the metal and makes cracking easier.
Makes sense. And 2,
those incredibly high flight cycles we talked about. All those short hops meant Aloha's planes were accumulating stress cycles way faster than airlines flying longer routes. Fatigue damage built up much quicker than anticipated.
So the structure was weak, the environment was tough, and the usage was extreme. But surely there were inspections, maintenance.
There were supposed to be.
Yeah.
And this is where things really went wrong. The NTSB found Aloha wasn't properly complying with mandatory FAA safety rules called airworthiness directives, or ADs.
Like safety recalls for planes.
Pretty much. They required specific inspections or modifications. Aloha had apparently missed required ADs, calling for EDI, current inspections on these lap joints.
Eddy current, what's that?
It's a non-destructive test. Uses electromagnetic fields to find tiny cracks under the surface, cracks you can't see with the naked eye, especially under paint or sealant.
So they weren't looking for these hidden cracks properly.
We weren't doing the required tests that could have found them before they became critical. These cracks were just growing, unseen.
What about the big scheduled maintenance checks?
D-checks,
right?
Right. The D-check is the most thorough overhaul that takes the plane apart. But Aloha had issues there too. While they did them within the FAA's required flight hours, they were doing so many short flights.
That the cycle count between D-checks was way too high. Higher than Boeing recommended.
Exactly. The plane was aging much faster in terms of stress cycles than the hour-based schedule accounted for.
And the quality of those checks.
Also a major problem. Aloha didn't really have spare planes. So instead of taking a plane out of service for weeks for a proper D-check, they split the work up, did bits and pieces overnight between flights.
That sounds less than ideal.
Understatement. Inspections done quickly, at night, often under poor lighting conditions. The NTSB found evidence that inspectors had missed hundreds of visible cracks. They found 24 cracks Aloha had actually patched. So they knew about those, but missed hundreds more.
Was it incompetence or something else?
The sources point to a serious lack of technical depth at Aloha. They didn't have a proper engineering department to analyze structural issues. Inspectors reportedly had minimal formal training, maybe just a couple of hours, and no specialized training on fatigue or interpreting complex ADs.
So they might not have even understood the significance of what they were seeing. Or not seeing.
It's possible. The NTSB suggested the deterioration was so widespread across their fleet, it might have just started to look normal to the maintenance crews. They lost perspective on how bad it really was.
So a vulnerable design, harsh environment, extreme usage, missed inspections, poor quality checks, lack of expertise. A perfect storm.
Absolutely. But it gets worse. There were warnings. Clear warnings.
Like what?
Well, there was a crash in Taiwan back in 1981. Far Eastern Air Transport, a 737 that broke up in flight due to lap joint fatigue. And that plane only had 33,000 cycles.
Less than half of Aloha's plane. That should have been a huge red flag.
It should have. And even Boeing itself visited Aloha in October 1987, just 6 months before the accident.
What did Boeing find?
Their own inspectors noted concerns about corrosion, about the number of patches. They reportedly advised Aloha to take the planes out of service for 30 to 60 days for major structural repairs.
Did Aloha do it?
No, they didn't ground the planes for those extensive repairs.
And wasn't there something about the FAA inspector not being at that meeting?
Yes, this is a really troubling detail from the sources. Apparently, Boeing prevented the local FAA principal maintenance inspector, the main government oversight guy for Aloha, from attending that meeting with the airline.
On what grounds?
Boeing cited customer-client privileges. basically saying it was a private discussion.
That seems incredibly problematic, blocking the regulator from hearing safety concerns.
Deeply problematic. It raises serious questions about transparency. And that local FAA inspector, he was massively overloaded, responsible for 8 different airlines across the Pacific, visited Aloha infrequently. And crucially, he wasn't even aware of just how high Aloha's flight cycles were compared to other airlines he oversaw.
So he didn't have the full picture either.
Didn't have the resources or maybe the specific data to connect the dots. The FAA did do a big national inspection sweep in late 1987 that included Aloha. They found organizational deficiencies but didn't take enforcement action.
Why not?
Because the regulations themselves were too vague, too subjective. It was hard to definitively say Aloha was breaking the rules, even though, in hindsight, the maintenance was clearly inadequate.
So it wasn't just Aloha's fault. The system had gaps.
Big gaps. Even the FAA's main program for inspecting older planes back then, the SSIP, didn't specifically cover the fuselage skin lap joints.
Why on earth not?
Based on faulty assumptions, they assumed any serious cracking would cause visible bulging or smoking rivets that would be easily seen, and they assumed internal tear straps would stop a crack from running catastrophically.
Both assumptions proved wrong in this case.
Tragically wrong. The cracks grew hidden, and the tear straps didn't hold. It was a systemic failure. Outdated rules, lack of resources, unclear accountability, flawed assumptions. The accident just laid it all bare.
The scale of that failure, seeing that plane, it must have sent shockwaves through the industry.
Absolutely. It was undeniable proof that something was fundamentally wrong with how aging aircraft were being managed and overseen. No more brushing it under the rug.
What happened immediately?
The FAA acted fast, like the very next day. Emergency ADs went out ordering immediate detailed inspections of lap joints on all older 737.
And what did they find?
They found problems, lots of them. Across 18 different airlines, they found 49 instances of significant cracking or corrosion. 14 of those planes had damage so bad they needed immediate major repairs or were simply retired. Aloha 243 wasn't an isolated case. It was just the first one to fail so spectacularly.
So this accident really forced a change in thinking.
A revolution, really. Especially after a major FAA conference on older airplanes held in June 1988. The whole philosophy shifted.
How so?
It moved away from just finding damage during inspections towards preventing it. The new approach was proactive, solution-oriented. If a part was known to be susceptible to fatigue after a certain number of cycles, the rules started requiring mandatory replacement or modification, not just inspection.
Fixing the problem before it breaks.
Exactly. They also created new programs, like the FAA Aging Fleet Program. This put FAA inspectors right there on the hangar floor, directly watching airline mechanics perform critical structural work on older planes. More direct oversight.
What about Aloha itself? Did they clean up their act?
They had to. They completely overhauled their maintenance program, created proper engineering and quality control positions with qualified people, stopped doing those fragmented overnight D-checks.
And the NTSB recommendations?
They issued 21 specific safety recommendations based on this accident. Things like better training and certification for inspectors, basing maintenance schedules on flight cycles, not just hours, new corrosion control programs, and crucially, requiring full-scale fatigue testing for new aircraft designs to prove they can last well beyond their expected service life.
Were those recommendations adopted?
Most of them were implemented, yes. They formed the basis for much of today's approach to aging aircraft safety.
So for you, the listener flying today, what's the legacy?
The legacy is significantly safer skies, especially on older aircraft. The kind of widespread, unaddressed structural decay found on the Queen Liliuokalani is considered almost unimaginable on a U.S. airliner today because of the changes spurred by this disaster.
Did these changes spread worldwide?
Eventually, yes, though sometimes tragically slowly. Some point to the China Airlines 747 crash in 2002 caused by an old, improperly repaired fatigue crack, as an example, where maybe the lessons hadn't fully penetrated globally by then. That's often cited as the last fatal structural failure of a passenger jet.
It's interesting, though, how the public remembers it. People focus on the miracle landing, the drama.
Right, the sheer visual horror and the incredible airmanship, which is understandable, but they often miss the really profound systemic safety improvements that came out of it.
And it definitely cemented that image of explosive decompression in movies and stuff.
It did, sometimes leading to maybe slightly irrational fears about flying, when statistically it's incredibly safe, precisely because of lessons learned from events like this.
But you can't deny the miracle aspect was real. That plane should have broken apart.
Honestly, looking at the NTSB reports and the damage, it's astounding it didn't. missing that huge section, broken floor beams, twisted structure, losing an engine.
It holding together was partly luck.
A combination, I think. The inherent robustness, maybe more than even Boeing realized, the incredible skill and calm execution by Captain Schornsheimer and First Officer Tompkins, and yes, probably a healthy dose of just sheer luck that day.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, Aloha 243 wasn't just a sudden event out of the blue.
No, it was the culmination, the result of years of stress accumulating on an aging structure. Made worse by maintenance that wasn't up to scratch, warnings that weren't fully heeded, and a regulatory system that had some critical blind spots.
A failure across multiple levels.
Exactly. Layers of safety that broke down.
And for you listening, what this story really underscores is just how complex air travel safety is.
It highlights all those hidden system design rules, maintenance procedures, constant oversight that have to work correctly every single day to keep flying safe. Systems that were significantly strengthened because of what happened on Flight 243.
It really makes you think about the sheer amount of diligence, the layers of oversight, the continuous learning that goes into keeping complex systems running safely, and the potential consequences when even one or two of those layers fail.
Which leads to a final thought, maybe. What other critical systems in our lives, infrastructure, technology, maybe even societal systems, depend just as much on the kind of constant, often unseen vigilance to prevent disaster?